Hey guys, Frosty Knives here, back with another book review. And I was looking through the comments of my 50th anniversary Carrie book review, just to see what people were seeing about that review. And in one of the comments, someone had mentioned that now that I've done Carrie, well, maybe I could do all of his other books in publication order and just go through the books that Stephen King has published. Books, short stories, and whatnot. I thought to myself, that seems like a monumental task to read his books in the order that they were published in. One book building off the other books. Is that something that I would want to do? Is that something that I dare do? Since I've already reviewed a good chunk of Stephen King's bibliography? Do I dare do something like that? So guys, here's my reread and re-review of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. Let's try tackling this in publishing order. I don't know how far I'll get, but however far this particular journey takes us, I'm sure it will be enjoyable, and there are always new things to learn and to talk about when it comes to the master of horror, Stephen King. So let's talk about it. And since Salem's Lot is one of the books that I've already reviewed and read and did a review on about 4-ish years ago, I thought to myself, well, I don't want to do a straight review. How can I do something different? What angle can I come at to bring something new and different, something else to talk about? So I started thinking about King's library as a whole and how he is essentially building a Kingverse, right? He's building his own universe of stories, and all of his stories and books and short stories intertwine and bump up against each other, and some of them are prequels, some of them are sequels, a good chunk of them all bleed into the Dark Tower. He's building this massive universe of his own where all of his stories and characters and towns live and exist together. And I said, maybe that's how we should approach this. We can talk about the observations and the connections of all of his books as they going forward, as they grow. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to do a straight review. We're just going to talk. We're just going to talk about connections and observations that I've made while reading Salem's Lot for the, I don't even know, 12th time. I've read this book so many times in my life that this is the horror equivalent of comfort food. This is like a nice bowl of mac and cheese where you can just eat it and it's satisfying, and it may not be the most luxurious thing you've eaten, may not be the most sophisticated thing you've eaten, but it really hits the spot. And that's what Salem's Lot is. It is horror comfort food. So you know the story. This is the second book that King published. And we all know the story of Salem's Lot, right? Ben Mears, Mark Petrie, Susan Norton, vampires, Danny Glick, Barlow and Straker, Father Callahan, old-time vampires in modern-day America. And that's one of the things that I like about this book, is that Stephen King is not looking to change vampire lore. He doesn't want to put his own spin on it. He doesn't want to grow it or change it or make it modern. You are getting straight vampire lore, traditional vampire rules and lore, stakes through the heart, holy water, cutting off the head, stuffing it with garlic, throwing the coffins in the rivers. This is traditional vampire imagery, just done in modern day times. Now, I say modern day times. It was modern at the time. This book was in 1975, 77, somewhere around there. I can take a quick look at it. 1975. So at the time, it was modern, you know. It may not be modern now, but at the time, you had modern vampires, old-time vampires in modern, small-town USA. And that gives the book a lot of charm. There's a lot of charm to that, right? Because you know what to expect if you follow traditional vampire lore. You know how it works. And it just feels like something very comfortable to read. So I'm glad that he decided to just give us a straight vampire novel. Now, later on in his future works, he will toy with the vampire idea, and he will change it. He will come up with some new ideas of his own. He will twist it around and make it new and put new spins on it. But for Salem's Lot, we got a nice traditional vampire story. And reading this again, I was amazed at how close the original 1980 miniseries was to this book. Very little in that miniseries was changed from the book. You still had same cast of characters, and you still had the same things going on. Still had the Marston house, still had Barlow and Straker. You still had Mike Ryerson when that famous look at me scene lifted right out of the book. Still had Danny Glick floating outside Mark's window, scratching at it, trying to be let in. The resurrection of Marjorie Glick in the funeral home. And then the eventual death of Straker, and then the eventual death of Barlow, and the eventual confrontation, and what happens to Father Callahan, the confrontation between Callahan and Barlow, where he kills Mark's parents in their home, and then there's that standoff. The only real major changes that were made, and I think they were good changes, was they made Barlow in the miniseries a Nosferatu vampire instead of the more traditional, normal-looking, sounding, talking vampire like he was in the book. That works in a book, but I can see what they were trying to do in the movie. They wanted something that looked ferocious. They wanted something that looked evil, that looked non-human, and so they went with that blue Nosferatu Barlow, and it worked. All of the lines that Barlow had in the book were just given over to Straker, so most of what Straker says in the miniseries is what Barlow said in the book. And that's all they did. They just shifted the dialogue over, and they gave us a creepier-looking Barlow, and for a visual medium like television and miniseries, I think it worked. And it certainly sticks in your head. And sticks in your head for a very long time. So I think that was a good choice. So let's talk about some of my observations with the book. Being that this was Stephen King's second published book and his more fleshed out book than Carrie. So the book was told from the point of view of three characters. Three main characters tell this story. The first one is Ben Mears. He's your male lead. He's a writer, a widow. His wife died in a motorcycle accident. He's a writer with a couple of best-selling novels under his belt, and he's come back to Salem's Lot to sort of exorcise the demons of his past and to write new stories. So Ben is your first of many writer characters that Stephen King will put in a book. There are many other books where the main character or one of the major characters is a writer. And I think that all those versions, whether it's Ben Mears or Jack Torrance or Jim Gardner or Bill Denbrough, I think all those writer characters that he writes in his books are just different facets of his own personality. I think they're just different images of him. You know, him when he was younger, him when he was struggling with alcoholism. Later on, there's going to be middle-aged King writers. And then later on, as he's now older, will be older writers. But I think all of the writers, starting with Ben, are just versions of King. Either versions that he is or was, or versions of himself that he wishes to be. So that's sort of my first observation of the book. And Ben Mears was a good character. First of many good writer characters. And the first point of view character that's telling the story of Salem's Lot. Second character was Susan Norton. That's the second point of view character that tells the story. She is the lead female, the female lead. She is eventually becomes Ben's love interest. She is an artist. She lives with her parents. She lives under a very domineering mother. She wants to break away, wants to go live on her own, wants to get out from under the wings of her parents, wants to become her own person, and eventually meets Ben and gets caught up not only with Ben in a romantic relationship, but then also gets caught up in all of the vampire hoop-de-doo that's going on in the lot. The third main character that this story is told from is the lot itself. So we have Ben, we have Susan, and we have the lot. And this is the first time, not the last time, but the first of many times where Stephen King makes this town, not just the setting of the story or the place where the evil happens, but he makes the town a character. Salem's Lot is a character itself. It lives, it breathes, it dies, it has a history, and he really fleshes it out like he fleshes out Ben, like he fleshes out Susan. It really becomes this living organism. Just like Derry does, just like Haven does, just like Castle Rock does. Stephen King really likes to play with this idea of the towns in his story not just being settings or not just being places where things happen, but really they are living organisms that either help the evil thing happen or the evil thing that is happening happens to the town as well. And so we really get that. We get history of the lot. We get back history of what's happened and genealogy and people who have lived there, and it really becomes a living organism. And this is Stephen King's sort of outlook on small town life. And in a lot of ways, and I read this in another article or in another interview or another article about this book, Salem's Lot is really a metaphor that Stephen King was trying to write about, talking about the death of the small town, right, in modern America. That as modern America and cities grew up around, became more industrialized, more technology, more people, more buildings, and grew bigger, that all of these big towns eventually snuffed out all these little towns. And as people left small towns to go to the big cities, these small town America essentially became ghost towns. And so, metaphorically, Salem's Lot becomes a ghost town due to the fact that America is growing up and big cities are growing up and people are leaving small towns for the bright lights of the bigger city. Metaphorically, it's becoming a ghost town, while literally it is transforming into a dead town as the vampires take over. And I like that, right? I like how King takes the city element, the town element, and just talks about it as if it were, just another living creature and its life and death cycle. So Stephen King will do that a lot in his books going forward. And this is where it all starts. You've got the obligatory writer in the book. You've got the town where it becomes a character in the book. And in this book, like I had mentioned in the previous video where I said in all of Stephen King's early writings during the 80s and 70s, all of his early writings were touched in some way, shape, or form by addiction. In Salem's Lot, we have the obligatory alcoholic, and that's Father Callahan. Father Callahan, who is the main priest in the story, who is also fighting with his own demons, fighting with his own alcoholism. And so, just like addiction will touch all of his works in the 80s and 70s, and this won't be the last story where we have a character addicted to something. Sometimes the writer and the addict will be two different people. Sometimes the writer will also be the one who is addicted. So there's variations of a theme going forward. But for the most part, we're always going to see a writer. We're always going to see an addict, at least in the early books. And we're always going to get deep dive histories of the major towns in Stephen King's writing. A couple of other things I observed and I liked in the book. The funeral of Danny Glick. I don't remember the funeral being in the miniseries, but we have the funeral of Danny Glick. And boy, can Stephen King at this time, he really knows how to write a kid's funeral that really disturbs you, and that's really just it's horrifying on multiple levels, and it's disturbing on many levels. But he really knows how to capture the grief and the emotion and all of that that's involved with the funeral of a child, and we get that with Danny Glick. We'll get that again later on with Gage. And in a lot of ways, Danny Glick is very much like Gage Creed. Both get very gruesome, right-sounding, hard-to-read funerals. The funeral of Gage very much mirrors the funeral of Danny. Both of them are children who come back to do very evil things. So there's a lot of parallels in Salem's Lot between that. And I think, this was a young Stephen King at the time. He had 3 small children. And when you're a young parent, one of the most terrifying things you can think about is the death of your own child. And he really was able to convey that emotion in Salem's Lot. And with Danny Glick, it was really, really well done. It was a really well done scene. The horror in this book is very subtle, but it's very psychological. It's not gruesome. It's not in your face. It's not extremely gory, but it is very psychological. The scene with Mike Ryerson sitting there, with his eyes glowing as a vampire, still a very spooky scene to read. Danny Glick floating at the window, Marjorie Glick rising from the table with her shroud still on her, screeching like a banshee. He does the horror very well, and he does it very subtly. And there's a lot of psychological elements involved. The people in this book, all the people that are trying to fight the vampires, they're broken psychologically and emotionally way before they're ever broken physically. This is a very psychological and emotional battle that they have to get to. The staking of the vampires is the easy part. The accepting of the vampires and the emotional turmoil that they go through prior to that, that's the battle, and that's the hard part. A couple of other connections that I made that I thought were kind of interesting. When Danny Glick is outside Mark Petrie's window and he's trying to get in, and he's trying to hypnotize Mark to let him in, the only way that Mark can sort of fight Danny so he doesn't get hypnotized is he runs tongue twisters through his mind. He starts reciting tongue twisters in his head to try to break the hypnotic spell that Danny is trying to put on him. And one of the tongue twisters that runs through Mark's head is a very familiar one. It is, he thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts, right? The same tongue twister that Bill Denbrough shouted at Pennywise in It. I don't know if there are connections there or if Stephen King just really, really liked that tongue twister, but it cropped up. It cropped up with Mark in Salem's Lot, and it will crop up again in It, and it almost makes me wonder, because of the way that he wrote Bill Denbrough, it almost makes me wonder if at some point Stephen King either had to deal with stuttering of his own, or if he knew people who stuttered, because he really seems to have a grasp on how that works, and he really seems to be able to write that well. So I thought it was interesting that cropped up in this book. We'll see it again down the road, more prominently in It. And then let's talk a little bit about Father Callahan. It's been a long time since I've really did a deep dive with Father Callahan, and we all know that Father Callahan is going to wind up in the Dark Tower. He winds up in Wolves of the Calla. He leaves Salem's Lot at the end of this book a broken man. He has been forced to drink Barlow's blood. The church has rejected him. Physically, in the book, he can't get into the church anymore because he's unclean. He's tainted, and he leaves Salem's Lot an alcoholic, a broken man, a defrocked priest, and we know that he winds up fighting in Roland's world. Having reread this time, I am not surprised that Father Callahan wound up in the tower. And I'll tell you why. It's because he's not an ordinary priest, right? And he doesn't want to be an ordinary priest. He doesn't want to deal with what he calls the ordinary evils of the world. The idolaters, the gamblers, the cheaters, the liars, all the mundane sins that are out there. I lied on my taxes. I cheated on my wife. I beat someone up. I stole from someone. I did this. I did that. Father, forgive me. I have sinned. He finds that pedantic and mundane, and he doesn't want to be that kind of priest. He wants to be the kind of priest that leaves his mark on the world. He wants to be the kind of priest where he fights evil with a big E, right? Evil. He really believes in the supernatural, in the supernatural evil of the world. And he believes the church has strayed from that. He believes that the church doesn't believe in demons and boogeymen and ghosts and exorcisms and any of that anymore. They're now more modernistic, right? And the sins become more modernistic. And Callahan doesn't want that. He wants to be somebody. He wants to be somebody that fights a big bad. He wants to put his mark on the supernatural world. And he tries to do that with Barlow. Except Barlow, he just doesn't have the faith to fight, at this point in time, to fight Barlow. That's the kind of evil he's looking for. That's why he winds up in Roland's world, because he didn't have the faith to fight Barlow and to save his town from the vampires. But now he has the faith to fight for the universe. He wants to be a person, a priest, a man of the cloth, who puts his mark on not just the world or society, but on existence. And he eventually does that. He's not ready to do that in the lot, but he will be. And this is also the first time where King talks about the coming of the white, where he compares religion or faith or the power that Callahan has with what he calls the white. This is the first time we hear about the white. We'll hear about it a lot as we get into the tower. And he really brings this idea of duality with him through like all of his books. But this is where we begin to see the beginning of the first references to a power of good that is greater than all of us, and he calls it the white. Stephen King's idea of good and evil is very, very binary. There are really no shades of gray in Stephen King's world or in Stephen King's universe. There's black and white. The coming of the white versus the Crimson King. There's really no middle ground with him. He's very much a good versus evil, black versus white, right versus wrong kind of writer. And that's pretty much how most of his stories will pan out. There's a force of good, and there's a force of evil. There's really no anti-heroes. There's really no periods of gray. There's really no in-betweeners. At least not in the beginning. He's very much, he sees it in a very much a binary world. And you know, and that's not bad. And that will play, that philosophy, that mindset will play a huge role in The Dark Tower. The coming of the white and all of that, and Roland, because Roland, not to get too far off topic, but Roland is also very much like Stephen King in that he sees things black and white, yes or no, right and wrong, and that's it. And I think out of all of King's characters, the person who embodies Stephen King's mindset the most might be Roland. I think that's the closest mindset to Stephen King's is that we will get. So that's all of my observations and connections with Salem's Lot. This is just the very small step into what will become a very large multiverse, a Kingverse, if you will, as we go forward. The next book to read in publication order is shockingly a book that I have not reviewed yet, and I don't know why I have not done it, but shockingly I haven't, and that will be The Shining. I've never made a review of The Shining. I feel like that should have been one of the first books of King's that I reviewed, but I never did it. So we'll be doing that. That will be the next book in this journey that we'll read. I don't know how long this publication journey will take. I don't know how far we'll get into it, because let's face it, Stephen King's got close to 70 books out there. So, but we'll take it one book at a time, and we'll see how it goes, and we'll see where we wind up. And because your opinions, my opinions, I've noticed on Stephen King books tend to change depending upon at what period in my life I'm in. You know, when I was younger, I had a certain mindset. Now that I'm older, I have a different mindset. So what I grasp onto now in King books, it's a lot different than what I grasped onto then in King books. So there you go, guys. A reread and a re-review of Salem's Lot is still a fantastic book. It's a classic. It's a 5-star. It's a 10 out of 10. Whatever measuring system you use, this is a classic. It still holds up the test of time. And the last thing I will say about this book is that if Bram Stoker is the father of vampire novels, then Stephen King is the quirky drunk uncle who brought vampires into the modern day. This is a book that is just as good and as important as Dracula. It's on the same level. Dracula's a classic. Salem's Lot's a classic. You should read it. You should own it. And the more you read it, the better it gets. So guys, that is my review of Salem's Lot. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, thank you for watching my videos. Give it a like and a thumbs up and a share around. Leave some comments down below. And I'll see you in the next review.